very much, Michael. I think that's good advice. Start small, dip your toes in the water. I think that's a good piece of advice for those of you who haven't yet got there in terms of integrating livestock. Okay, so lastly, let's hear from Dr. Peter Kotzeff. He's a veterinarian and runs a 2,000-acre cash crop and grazing operation with an emphasis on integrating cattle grazing, cover crops, and minimal tillage to improve soil quality. He's running 150 cow-calf pairs on a pasture base with the emphasis of increasing grazing capacity through managed grazing as well as reducing feed costs through grazing cover crops and crop residues. Peter received a 2014 Beef Farmers of Ontario Environmental Stewardship Award and the 2015 Grazing Award for his grazing operation. Please welcome Peter.
Thanks, Joel.
Do you have yeah, you've got some slides. Yep.
So I'm not as articulate as the three speakers up here, so fortunately I brought a PowerPoint presentation so you can look at the presentation and not listen to me as much. So my version of regenerative agriculture, I believe that there's unintended and unacceptable consequences of contemporary agriculture, and I'm a prime example. So that's, I might move over here. So this is a farm I took over in 2014, and I thought I'd do the right thing. I lowered the hills, took out the fence rows and the trees, and tile drained it. And of course, after you tile drain it, you have to work the land up, and those are the results. And that's the corn crop. This is the Paisley River that runs by one of my farms, the Saugeen River that runs one of my farms close to Paisley. And we can have a lot of discussions about dissolved phosphorus, but when the river looks like chocolate milk, there's a lot of stuff going through there, not just phosphorus. So really, my fundamental objective when I look at my land base, what am I here for? I want to identify the best use of my land, and my priority is to keep the soil on my land. So it's already been mentioned, just a quick overview, about 2,000 acres, half of it's in cash crop, a quarter is in grazing, a quarter is in woodland and wetland. I also have about 8 kilometers, the Saugeen River runs through my properties, and the headwaters of the Pottawami River up in Kilsyth. So the soil is sand to Paisley brick and tile clay. About 800 acres are tile drained. The fields are irregular and sloped. I am presently running 225 cow-calf pairs and 160 retained yearling calves for grazing for next year. So the best land use, 25% of my land is set aside. River, woodland, and wetland. I don't know if this shows up well on the screen, but that's the Beatty Saugeen River going through one of the farms. There's another example of the Beatty Saugeen. That's the Saugeen River running close to Chesley. The mill pond in Chesley. Saugeen River by Paisley. So it's a resource that I think we all should try to preserve. There's a Pottawami Headwaters by Kilsyth. The woodland's protected. I put a single-strand electric fence around all the forested areas. I didn't drain many sloughs. The wetland has multiple uses, and one of them is for water for my cattle through the fall season. There's another wetland. So that's the 25% that's set aside. The remainder, my responsibility, and this has been sort of my goal, my purpose for the last 5-6 years, is to integrate cattle grazing, minimal tillage, cover crops, and sensible crop rotations to improve soil health and water quality. And so that's the runoff from one of my farms in the spring. And the water is clear. So why do I keep cattle? Three reasons. In some of my land base is only suitable for grazing cattle. I believe holistic grazing improves the soil in the crop rotation. and grazing cover crops adds revenue to my operation. So that's just steep land. I'm grazing cattle on steep land, on rough land. Again, that's rough land. That's the Pottawami River, the headlands, and that's what the water looks like that virtually year-round. Riparian grazing, I'll graze about, there's actually only about 100 meters of that oxbow is grazed, and I'll only graze that part of the river in the rotation, so it'll be exposed, that stream bed will be exposed for maybe 8 or 10 days out of a grazing season. I also do some glade grazing in some land. So, pasture as a crop rotation. I think holistic grazing prevents erosion, improves soil, and adds resilience to subsequent crops. And so that's a picture of seeding soybeans green 2 years after pasture. And you saw that pasture field earlier on the slide, just a couple slides earlier. So grazing cover crops, there's a cell of cows and calves grazing an oat pea mix cover crop. They've done well, they do really well on it, and it's really helped the land. So other things that I do to try to improve health and reduce soil erosion, minimal tillage cover crops and diverse rotation. So one at a time, minimal tillage. I aim for no tillage, not always, but that's the goal, and I try to do as much as possible. And again, that's another picture of seeding soybeans into a green cover crop. This is before I had a lot of cover crops. I'm seeding soybeans into stubble, into wheat stubble. Strip till corn. Any corn that I grow is strip tilled after that first year. And winter wheat after oats. This is a nice rotation as far as cover crops, as far as protecting soil health, because the oats come off early enough that you can get the wheat crop in time to get a good growth. Cover crops, I aim to be 100% covered. And so what I've been using is on my corn and beans, I'll aerial seed a cover crop on. And there's a picture of aerial seeding cereal rye on corn in September. And there's a picture of annual rye and clover in the fall that was seeded at V7 stage. And there's a picture of the cow-calf pairs grazing that corn, those corn stalks, and the annual rye. That's annual rye there. You can see that's hilly land that needs to be protected. That's a picture of seeding oats and rye on soybeans, and that's the rye actually growing through the snow. That's in December. We had a bit of a thaw, and that cereal rye is amazing what it can do. There's some cows grazing an oat cover crop. Crop rotation. My land base is not blessed with a thick topsoil. It's very shallow. So I believe on my operation anyway, I can't have the same crop in 2 years in a row. So what I'll do is I'll rotate between soybeans, winter wheat, pasture, hay, corn, oats, and spring wheat, depending on the circumstances and the crop. So mitigating erosion with rotation is easy in 2 crops. You know, winter wheat, it comes off early enough. It's a no-brainer. We can establish a really good cover crop after that. Corn, the residue of corn and an aerial seeded cover crop allows me to stabilize the land and reduce erosion. So there is an oat cover crop after wheat. That's a picture of the cereal rye the spring after was grazed. And as you can see, the leaves aren't on the trees yet, so that's probably in April. And that rye is starting to grow in already pretty well. And I'll plant soybeans directly into that. So mitigating erosion with soybeans on my operation is problematic. The ways I'm trying to get around it is I'll plant beans directly into green whenever possible, which is about 95% of the time. And I'm trying to use early maturing beans to give me a bigger window of time to put winter wheat in. I'm also trying to establish more residue in the soil before the beans go in to give some more structure to the soil to reduce erosion. And the third thing I'm going to try to do again, I think my land might be more suitable now. I'm going to go back to trying to aerial seed winter wheat and use it not just as a cover crop, and hopefully it'll be an established crop. So there's a picture of aerial seeded winter wheat on about 150 acres from a few years ago, and it wasn't quite good enough to make a crop, so it was a cover crop. And I put beans into it. Other benefits of rotation: the sod improves the soil health with holistic grazing, and also I can spread manure on a growing crop. So with this diverse rotation, I can virtually 100% of the time spread manure either on a cover crop or on sod. So just some resources that I use. There's a whole bunch. I could have gone on for 20 minutes. You know, Dwayne Beck, Gabe Brown, Ray Etcheletta, Bud Williams, Blake Vince, Andrew McGuire. He's an interesting guy. He's a scientific skeptic that's worth listening to. OMAF services, some books, and again, this is from Blake. Stubble Over the Soil by Carlos Lamarca is a very interesting book, and The One Straw Revolution by a Japanese eccentric. They're both well worth looking to. They're a little bit old, but it's still well worth looking into. That's a picture of one of the farms. I use a windmill to bring water to the cows. I mean, this is what I think it's all about. You know, we're blessed in our area. We still can swim in the rivers, and that's sort of an important thing to try to preserve if we possibly can.